So a couple weeks ago, I went for this super intense hike, 20 kilometers. I was fully geared up. I had my backpack, hiking poles. Obviously, you can see this wide-brimmed hat I'm wearing to protect my bald head from all those dangerous UV rays. And I even wore compression socks that went right up to my knees. And so I'm at the point in my life where it's no longer about looking cool, but it's just about sheer survival. And so there I was hiking along. It probably looked like I was ready to do some mountaineering in the Alps, but I was just out for this long, flat walk somewhere in Dartmouth. And I'm hiking along at a pretty good pace, and then this old man passes right by me. Now, he was on a bicycle, so he had a bit of an advantage. But he's, leisurely ride. I couldn't help but notice this big grin on his face. He was just loving life. And I actually caught up to him because he had pulled over up ahead just to enjoy the view. And as I was walking by, he waves at me, and it was almost like he was approaching me. And so I stopped to talk, and we got chatting, super friendly. We were talking about the beautiful view, and I tried to explain to him why I was wearing these ridiculous socks. And then, as we continued, he asked me, well, what do you do? And so I said, I'm a priest, believe it or not. I know I don't look like one right now. And he said, well, I've gone to a few different Christian churches over the years. And then he asked about my family, and I asked about his family, and he shared that his wife had recently died. And so before the end of the conversation, I asked if I could say a quick prayer with him. And so we did. We said just this 30-second, very ineloquent prayer, and yet it was still very moving. And I left, continued hiking, thanking God for that beautiful little encounter. And in fact, others were with me, not with me at the time, but they kind of saw this exchange, and they're like, Father Simon, what did you do? How did you engage him in conversation? And it's like, I didn't do anything. I mean, the only thing I did was I wore these weird socks, but he was the one who engaged me. He talked to me, and I just kind of continued the conversation. Now, last week, Father Dan, he shared a similar kind of story. He was on an airplane, and he got chatting with this lady, and then he fell asleep. Took a long nap, and it was only later in the terminal they caught up, and they too prayed together. And I wonder, when you hear these stories, I hope that you feel inspired, edified by these little, what I'll call mission anecdotes. But I wonder if we also might feel a little bit uncomfortable, like, I could never do that. Or, you want me to talk to other people about faith? Or, who am I to go on mission? Who am I, really? Like I haven't read the Bible cover to cover, or I'm not a professional, I'm not a priest, I don't have a theology degree. It just feels awkward. Remember my dad famously saying something to the effect of, if Jesus wanted us to evangelize others, why did he make it so hard? Come we relate to that? I mean, and this is my dad, he's actually tried. He's talked to family members about faith. He's come alongside coworkers who are really struggling. He's gone out of his way even to talk to people who live on our street about God. And yet, this can feel very hard. And I'm not that guy. Now, I want to look at two different scriptures today to help us face these hesitations that I think many of us feel. And the first is from the book of Amos. So here's this man from the Old Testament who went to preach before the king. And he's in this sanctuary. There's other priest professionals who are there listening. And they basically tell him, look, Amos, get lost. We're not interested. This is what they literally say. O seer, go, flee away to the land of Judah. Earn your bread there and prophesy over there. As if to say, you think you're some kind of professional, you're just looking to get paid for prophesying here. We're not interested in what you have to say. Now, I just want to pause, and this is probably a review, but what is a prophet? I think for many of us, in our minds, we conjure up this image of this old guy, long beard, maybe a staff, who's yelling at people, turn or burn, something like that. A fortune teller, maybe, that kind of a thing. Well, actually, a prophet is simply someone who conveys God's word to others. And somebody who's like a messenger for God, and maybe the word is challenging, but maybe the word is very consoling. Maybe the word is about the future, but maybe it's God's now word for today. And so Amos, he's making it very clear. He's being accused of this, and he says, look, I'm not a professional. I'm an amateur. In fact, this is what he says. I am no prophet, nor a prophet's son. Like this wasn't the family business that I grew up with, but I'm a herdsman and a dresser of sycamore trees. I'm basically a shepherd and a gardener, an arborist. That's who I am. And yet the Lord took me from following the flock, and he said, go prophesy to my people Israel. And Amos, who was an amateur, clearly, he was obedient, and he embraced this identity of prophet. I want to look to the gospel, and here we have this story of Jesus who sends them out 2 by 2 to go out on this little training mission. And as he sends out the 12, I'm sure many of them, they could have argued, like, you want us to go talk to other people about you? You want us to heal people and even set people free from oppression? Like, we've barely finished the first training module here, Jesus. We're not ready. We're not equipped. This feels awkward. This feels extremely hard. And as if Jesus was sensing their hesitation and their feeling of not having enough, he goes on to say, yeah, and by the way, take nothing. Don't take a bag. Don't take money. Don't take food. Don't even take an extra layer in case you're afraid it's going to cool off in the evenings. Take nothing. Don't take a hat. Don't take knee-length compression socks. I disregarded that instruction. He said you can take a staff and wear sandals. And maybe you figured it out. This is where we got our preaching series from in these weeks. Get your sandals on. Because we wanted to, in the summertime, reflect the fact that, yeah, it's a time to relax. This is definitely summer footwear. But as Father Dan said last week, sandals were like the work boots of the day. Sandals, I would say, are the footwear of the gospel. To wear sandals, to get your sandals on, Jesus is saying, go out. I want you to go out there and speak in my name. And as Father Dan said so beautifully, summertime, it's an opportunity for us. Summertime is mission time to actually get our sandals on and go out. Now, I just want to come back briefly to this point. Why does Jesus say, take nothing? It's hard enough as it is. And I think the reason is because he wants us not to rely on our training, on our experience, not to rely on our perfect planning, on being in control. Jesus wants us to rely on him, because that's when there's going to be breakthroughs. That's when things will really make a difference, when we rely completely on God. Okay, so what are the implications for us today? God sends Amos out, this amateur prophet. Jesus sends the 12 out on mission before they were ready. God is sending each one of us out on mission. That's you and that's me. To go be prophets, if you will, even amateur prophets, but to go and speak in his name to other people. And this is not something that comes just from ordination, but it actually comes right from baptism. So anybody who's been baptized, you were anointed during your baptism. You were anointed priest, prophet, and king. The prophet, the one who speaks on behalf of God. So we got to embrace our God-given prophet identity. All right? So I want you to turn to your neighbor and say, "You are a prophet." Go ahead, do that. Very good. Okay, turn to the other neighbor and say to them, "Use your words." Very good. That's what parents say to their kids, right? Some of you are sitting there and you weren't even using your words, but that's okay. You are a prophet. I am a prophet. We got to use our words. Now, there's this famous quote from St. Francis of Assisi: "Preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words." Which sounds so wise and so profound, right? The only problem is that he never said it. Actually, you know what St. Francis actually said? He said, "Preach the gospel at all times. When necessary, use beards." He actually never said that either. I was expecting a bigger laugh from that, but anyways, there you go. I'm not as funny as I think. St. Francis, from what we know of him, he felt it necessary to use words a heck of a lot. In fact, he talked to people about Jesus all the time. And when people stopped listening, when people rejected him, what did he do? He went and talked to the birds. He went and talked to the squirrels about Jesus. He used his words. And if we're going to embrace this identity of prophet that comes from God, we have to step out and use our words. Now, I want to make it super practical for us. Because I don't want you to just feel like, okay, we got to do this, and this feels so hard and awkward, it's impossible. So two things. First is it all begins with prayer, right? We know that. And last week, Father Dan, he gave us this beautiful prayer, something to the effect of, "God, I give you permission to use me on mission." Just say that with me. God, I give you permission to use me on mission. This prayer, something to this effect, has been part of my life daily. It's part of my routine. I get down on my knees and I say to God, "God, I'm available. I give you permission to use me on mission." And if you start praying this consistently, I promise you, you're going to end up meeting people and ending up in these little mission opportunities. And the second thing is to then, as we're praying, to then actually step out, to have conversations, to use your words, to talk to people. Not in a way that's weird or forceful, but in a way that's very kind and very organic. And what I want to offer you is 3 conversation starters that I found really helpful. And they're not statements that we throw at people, throw in their face. They're just questions to help invite a conversation to begin. And the first is really complicated. You ready for this? What did you do this weekend? Right? We can all say that, right? That's not too hard of a question to ask. What did you do this weekend? And then just be quiet and listen. And it's possible that they'll turn around and ask you, "Well, what did you do this weekend?" And just be honest. At a certain point, one of the things you did this weekend is come to Mass at St. Benedict or watch Mass online at St. Benedict. And just to share that. Again, not to throw it in their face, but just to share something that's meaningful to you. Maybe a place where you find purpose, find peace. The second one is, do you have any faith background? And this is a phrase, a question that I've asked, and I found it remarkably effective. And again, it's possible that after they share, they might want to ask you the same question. Just on Thursday evening, we have this, by the way, I forgot to introduce at the beginning. Manas is here. Manas, just give us a wave. Manas is a seminarian with the Companions of the Cross. He's here for us just for the summer for 6 weeks, spending a bit of time doing, I guess, like a mini internship. And so Manas and I, we had to swing by the parish Thursday night. I forgot my charging cable. And so we just randomly bumped into these 2 young Indians who were here. They had recently arrived in Canada, and they were asking us like something about parking or whatever. We get into this conversation, and I verbatim, "Do you have any kind of faith background?" And they said, "Yeah, we're Sikhs. We're from Punjab in India." And yet they're very open, very curious about our church. When is the church open? And so I went inside to grab our magazine, the Benedictus, because it had the Mass times on it. And I was too lazy to come all the way upstairs. So I just went through the office, and they didn't have the latest one. I found a back issue, I think from December or something. And so I come out. Manas is speaking to them in Hindi by this point, which is beautiful. And I hand the magazine to this young girl, and she without missing a beat, she's like, she looks at the cover. She's like, oh yeah, that guy in the front, he's my coworker. He was the one who told me to come to church here at St. Benedict. Some random magazine from many, many months ago, and she knew the guy on the cover. She's Sikh. You get the sense that God is actually in control. Like, he's setting these situations up. And we just have to be open and embrace our own identity and step out in faith. Do you have a faith background? Third one, is there anything I can pray for? And this might suggest that you've, gotten into a bit of a conversation. But what I love about this, what's so effective, is every single person is struggling with something. We're all carrying burdens. We're all looking for sympathy, for support. And very often, this can lead to just a very simple prayer, maybe 30 seconds, a minute, something that doesn't have to be complicated, but it gives space for God to touch a person's heart. So just giving you a few practicals. Start with prayer. God, I give you permission to use me on mission. And then a few conversation starters. And if now you're still feeling like, you know what, Father, this still feels super awkward. I don't feel ready. I don't feel equipped. Well, good. Because then you're going to rely on God to make up the difference. And you can, by the way, you can take a photo of that slide if it's helpful, just a few starters. Now, you've heard different stories of how priests have stepped out. We're the professionals, right? And just so you know, I find this awkward and hard myself too. But I want to end with a quick story of a young lady in our parish in her early 20s who had this little mission moment very recently. So she's started coming to our church within the last 6 months or so, and she just loves it here, right? And so a few weeks back, she's at the airport. She gets chatting with this family, and they're super friendly, and they get into this beautiful conversation. I don't think they're even from here. They live in a different province or something. And anyways, many weeks go by, and then just the other day, she's praying in the chapel with her aunt during Eucharistic adoration. And afterwards, quite unexpectedly, they're like, oh yeah, we got to go to the grocery store. We got to get a watermelon, right? And this young lady, she's a bit of an expert, and so she runs into the grocery store, and she starts like knocking on the different watermelons to tell if they're, I don't know, good, I guess. I don't know anything about watermelons. But she's in there in the grocery store, and she's out of the corner of her eye, she sees this little kid. She's like, how do I know him? And then she looks over, and she sees the parents, and she recognizes them, and she realizes, this is the same family that I met at the airport those weeks ago. And she goes over, she starts talking, and they had actually driven, and they had just arrived that day to Halifax because they had moved here permanently. And this was their very first outing to go to the grocery store. And she meets them. And the first thing that she says is, you know what, if you don't know anybody, if you're looking for community, why don't you come to St. Benedict Church? Because this is a place where the very first thing the priests say every week is, welcome. It's a place where you will feel welcomed and loved. And this little story of how one young lady at our parish embraced her God-given identity to be a prophet. This is what we do at St. Benedict. This is why we exist, to be a parish on mission. This is something I know that we can do. We can step out in faith. As Father Dan said, summertime is mission time. And I just want to challenge us all that right now, to start this, to start praying, and to look for little opportunities to have little conversations. We have no idea the impact of a simple invitation, how that could change someone's life. This September, in just 2 months, we're going to be starting our next alphas. And I say alphas with an S, plural, because we got big plans. We want to reach more people than ever before, help more people than ever before to come to discover Jesus and begin a relationship with him. And if we individually step up and start being these amateur prophets, I think we're going to see that. We're going to see that happen. And just to take the pressure off, the Holy Spirit's already out there. He's already having conversations with people out there. And so let's get your sandals on and go out and join in those conversations.